First of all, thank you, Professor Joyaji and all of the team for making this amazing workshop with you. We are very happy that we could be here with you. And we're going to talk about Movimento Brasil Livre, which is a movement in Brazil that was... Is it working?
I guess not. Yeah, but now it's working. We're going to talk about the case of Movimento Brasil Livre, which is a movement in Brazil that led the streets protest against former President Dilma Rousseff, and that is now a leadership of the conservative movement in Brazil, and also striving into a populist communication style. But most importantly, we were thinking, looking at all the cases that you presented before, how many similarities we can find across cases that we are studying. And so this is also something we were looking at before. Could we make an analytical framework that would be addressed at a broader research purpose? And so, like, taking many of the examples you posed before, we were writing down. We wrote about a hypothetical case of a country, and not Brazil. And could you, for example, guess which country is this? Where this story unfolds, a country where the people distrust the state and heavily complain about corruption. A country where the people think the intellectuality live in ivory palaces and have no knowledge of real-world problems. Where people distrust the media, it's all fake news anyway. Where security, health, jobs, and education have been the main topics in social media. Where sarcasm and irony is booming in rejection to traditional politics. Can you guess where it is? Where minorities are blamed for the social deficient being. Well, actually, it could be anywhere, but it shows us that we are facing a phenomenon that is global. This phenomenon is global, though it has a lot of local idiosyncrasies. And we thought that better than talking about these idiosyncrasies that we find in Brazil, we should get a better understanding of this phenomenon. And so this is what studying the Brazilian case could contribute to the literature. And we think that the first good step that we need to take as a study field is move beyond the case of the global north and those such as the Arab Springs, and this is what we are doing here. So this is an amazing initiative that we can get in touch with a lot of cases that are normally not studied and not portrayed by the academy. We also need to analyze posts not only as data points in a data set, but also as intervention in collective conversations and as utterance of broader discourse. So we need to look into deep meaning, to move from data analytics also to data hermeneutics and combine both things. This is a pretty hard challenge, but it is a pretty necessary one. And yeah, use this hermeneutics, how we are approaching our case, how we are being able to explain that, to connect all these cases we are studying. And to do that, we thought it is very important to go heavily into the concept of populist communication, as populism is conceived in three different dimensions: as a weak ideology, as it could be used by left-wing groups, by right-wing groups, so it can get a lot of add-on ideologies, liberalism, conservatism, socialism. But it also can be conceived as a communication style. And as a communication style, it has two dimensions. The first one is narrative structure, which is appeal to the people. The people is the center of the hegemony. It is the legitimate source of power. So we always need to direct our speech to the people's will. We also need to identify our antagonists, those who are responsible for the deficient being of the society, those who are making all the wrong choices and bringing a burden to the society to carry. And also an anti-establishment approach, because the establishment is the structure of power, habits, and culture that makes the choices of the elite prevails over the will of the people, over the majority will. And it is also connected with a style of communication, which is the simplicity and the message. It's not only simple language, but also simple structure. You need to communicate everything very simple in order to address it to the people. And it also has to do with the identity that is conveyed. So a language that is the language spoken by the people, in the way the people speak it, is commonly addressed in the populist communication. The emotionalization is also another factor that is a characteristic of the communication, populist communication style, being more human, showing that you think and feel like the people feel is very important in the populist communication. And also the negativity. Like, we need to change the country. Everything is wrong. We need to make it better. And to do that, we can't simply say everything is good. So we need to raise the people to get their feeling that things are not right and that they must change, no matter what. And so we created this framework, which is actually based on these two different dimensions. First is the narrative structure, and it's in the inner ring. And the second one is the stylistical features of the populist communication. So we had 3 traits for each of them, which is this anti-establishment approach, the antagonist depiction, and the appeal to the people. But we also looked for these stylistical features, which is emotionalization, simplification, and negativity. And in the outer ring, we have 22 categories that we were looking for in text, and we coded it in the form of dummies. So, do they make a speech against the media? Yes or no? Do they make a speech against politics? Yes or no? So they were all 1 or 0 in the way we coded, except for feeling, which was negative, positive, or neutral, but which can also be converted to dummy. And we're coming back to that later. And this is what we applied for our case. But for a broader codification framework, we also have these other 2 categories, which is anti-business and the leader approach. As most of the populist communication, they try to appeal to a leader that is a representative of the people, that is the personification of the people's will. But in our case, these 2 categories weren't applied because the movement didn't use them at all. They were extremely pro-business, and they didn't have like a single leadership to personificate this populist speech. And this is how the framework looks when we add these 2 categories, considering these 6 traits. And this is the result of a dense review on the literature over populism. This is why we get all these traits, though some are not really important for our specific case, but it was thinking on how we could apply it for broader analysis.
Clarifying question, these are applied as codes to various
To texts. Yeah.
And but is there needs to be an agreement between coders on this?
Yeah. And so we
Some of these are pretty hard to code at, right?
yeah, well, we did a lot of coding process, so it was an iterative process, and we did it through induction. We got like worried to make it as clear as possible so that we would have the best for the codification for matching. So we looked for very objective criteria. For example, in the case of people, it could be the word people, but if the speech makes an appeal to other sort of categories that could be known as people, let's say the real Brazilians, the workers, the people who sustain these countries, the patriots, and so on, we could code it as an appeal to the people. And so we try to be very, very objective. in order to make this codification easier. So this is the framework, the global framework with anti-business and leader appeal. Well, for our specific case, which is the Free Brazil movement, we coded 622 posts that they made on Facebook to see how often they presented these traits in the posts. And we thought that we would, for example, find more appeal to the people than we did. So it was a little bit of our surprise in the end to see this result. They have a pretty simple way to communicate their message. For example, they have not a single post on Facebook that is plain text. They always use images and videos to make the message easier to be conveyed. But these results make us also think about how much, for example, a group may incite violence in their speech to be considered violent. How much would this be acceptable to say, okay, this group is non-violent? I mean, maybe only one single post, one single act of violence may be too violent. And so this is not a thing we want to measure like pretty objective to create thresholds for each item, but at least having these pictures is pretty good for us to compare, like in which case are we finding speech that defends the use of violence, the use of force, in which case we cannot find that, in which case they are appealing a lot to sarcasm, to emotivity, and in which case we cannot see that as often. So what we also try to see, this is a pretty, well, we're just making an attempt. First, this is not a conclusive study, but we tried to see in the text if we could find any correlation between these traits and the engagement in Facebook for each post. And then we saw that there is a very significant correlation between these 5 traits, specific in the case of Movimento Brasil Livre. And the first one is people. It looks like every time they build a message talking about the people's will, how about the people are willing something different from what the government is doing and so on, the post gets more engagement. Every time they make an anti-media, this was also pretty strong, and say that the media is controlling everything. And maybe it's stronger in the Brazilian case because we have a very centralized media which is controlled nationwide by 5 families. So these 5 families, they have control of the media, and it's not as in the USA, for example, where you have right-wing and left-wing media. It's just a very concentrated oligopoly. And also that mimetic language, well, this is not really something new. I think most of you have found this. Have more engagement, also because it's easier to spread, it's easier to receive. This was maybe the most hard category to define. What is mimetic and what is not, for example. So we had the idea that it should be so simple in the structure that it could be conveyed with only 2 or 3 ideas. So it could be a single image or a video that is as short as a couple of seconds to show, or as a GIF, to be mimetic. And confrontation was also something that scored high for engagement in Facebook, and sarcasm too also resulted in higher engagement with high significance. And this is how the medium engagement raised when each of these categories was found to be present in the text. Like normally the medium engagement in Facebook is 17,728. The measurement of engagement, I guess you all know, but just to reinforce, is likes, comments, and shares, summed all together in a simple way. When they appeal to the people, it raised for more than 30,000 and so on, as the graphic shows. So, we're just thinking for the applications of using a framework like this, and this is what we thought it would be most interesting to bring to discussion as a way where we could make a comparison between the cases that we are studying. It would be good to map populist performance and its development in social networks. It would also be used to compare cases across countries to test hypotheses. A lot of people are saying that populism is correlated with crisis. And so every time we have a crisis, it simply starts a wave of populism. That's what happens after the crisis of 1928, 29. That's what is happening now after the 2008 crisis worldwide. And so what we are living right now should be a result of the 2008 crisis. Is that true or not? Could we, for example, look at tests in Facebook since 2008 to see if it was really developing stronger? Some people correlate social media with populist communication, that they have an elective affinity. Is that true or not? Could we look for that? And also making cluster analysis to see which cases come closer and to see what these similarities and these differences could tell us about the development of populism around the world. And yeah, our final remarks about that is that we don't take populism as a bad thing, because the opposite of populism is elitism. Like, that's also not a good thing. So populism is actually appealing to the people, trying to make politics in the way people see and think. But of course, it has some negative features too. So this is not like trying to create something to say populism is bad and we should take care and see if it's raising or not. And well, we also understand, and this is our premise in the work, the hypothesis we would like to test in a broader sense if we have more data collected and analyzed, that populist ascension is a set of local response to the depoliticization process that is posed by globalization. Well, now liberal order states that politics is ended in the sense that we have the liberal order as the best system to be done. And so politics is made by professional people, is made by parties, and is discussed by specialists. And in this order of specialists, people don't do politics at all. They are represented. And so they leave politics for their representatives. And we understand that what we're doing, what the people are doing is say, we the people, we have a will, and we understand that the elites are not representing what we think. So we want to do politics in our way, and the establishment is to be blamed for our exclusion from politics. And we reject all these speeches that are composed of complex structure and made in a language that is absolutely inaccessible for the normal people, with a lot of jargons to talk about policies, to talk about transparency, accountability, and things that people normally don't use and don't talk about in their daily lives. And when they say that, they are also appealing to another sort of language, another way of talking. That's the humor, the language of everyday talks. And they are also making that in a heavily negative way to say, hey, that's not normal what we're doing. We are losing our jobs, we are losing our chance to get education. And so this is like a set of local response to this phenomenon that is global. And the social media revolution is also very important for us to understand why there is an uprising in pop, why there is a rising trend of using populism in Facebook and Twitter and in the world as a whole, because this is the first time we have mass and dialogical media together. We had telephone, we had other medias that were dialogic, but they were not mass media. And the mass media we had, they were not dialogical as television and radio. And so for the first time, the people can break the spiral of silence and bring their aesthetics to the communication. And they can be protagonists of politics. And so this is bringing a performative dynamic for the everyday conversations. And we need to get into Facebook's black box. I know it's pretty better to study Twitter because we know the data we have, and we can be confident that it's integer and we can work better with it for sure. But if we are studying, for example, populism, well, most of the people are not in Twitter. The people who use Twitter are most influential actors, so it's pretty good to study leaders. It's pretty good to study political actors, to study journalists, to study how opinion is being formed. But if we want to look at what people is talking and what people want, then we need to get into Facebook's black box, which is indeed a hard thing. And we know that the data we collected from Facebook wasn't all the posts that the movement has done, so we looked inside the posts in the Facebook page to see what sort of bias there was, and it was a bias of time. At some weeks, for example, we collected no posts. They gave no posts back from that week to us, but in other moments, they got like all the posts that was made in that day. So there's a time bias, but it was not a performance bias. They didn't give us the posts that scored higher for engagement, which is a good thing for our purpose. So we got pretty sure this was not the case of a performance bias where we would be selected by the dependent variable. Well, and as last, thank you for the opportunity to be here and to present our case. If you have more questions specific on what happened in Brazil, we have a work where we describe exactly where it is. It is a conservative group, and we used the posts in Facebook from them to make this work, this analysis. Thank you.